An hour presentation convince anybody of the worthwhile, the validity of all this stuff. It's just an impossible task. It takes much longer than that, working with these kinds of concepts, for it all to kind of solidify and to mesh one principle with another. The best I can do is pick people's interest in these kinds of presentation, and then I'm constantly asked, well, what should I read? So here is what people should read if they're interested in this kind of a format for child rearing. Growth setting. The first is A.S. Neil Summerhill. Summerhill is gone for some 65 years now in Great Britain based on these principles. And the point there about the 65 years is that if you don't keep doing something for 65 years, it's wrong. I mean, you know, he's not making any great money on it. So these principles have been going for 65 years there, and then at some other schools, even, you know, when you add up those cumulative years, the years are into the hundreds. And then Neil wrote a book oriented especially toward American audiences that's nothing but question and answers, called Freedom, Not License. You need to read Summerhill. It's quick and easy reading, but you need to read Summerhill before you read Freedom, Not License, so you know what those questions and answers are. Okay? Herb Snitzer was a reporter who went over as a reporter to look at Summerhill, got interested in it, wrote some articles for the New York Times, and then came back and wrote a book about Summerhill. And then this stuff kept just percolating in his mind, and dropped out of being a reporter and set up a school in upstate New York called the Lewis Wadham School. And after 8.5 years of experience there, you get a writer's approach, looking at what it is, called Today is for Children, Numbers Can Wait. This gives you a really good feeling about what it feels like to grow in these kinds of settings. Paul Goodman's Compulsory Miseducation is a classic. You almost know what the message is going to be by looking at the title. The argument in Paul Goodman's Compulsory Miseducation is, if it's compulsory, you get something, but you don't get education. And then numbers of alternatives of different ways of given the present resources of going about the whole growth setting educational endeavor. Joseph Chilton Pierce's Magical Child is one of those kinds of books that does a lot with brain research. It's tough going, but jumps off the page at people, and it's one of those books where people say, listen to this. It's hard going. You're reading about synapses and the neurons in the brain and all this kind of stuff. It's very difficult, and then all of a sudden he gives you the examples of how that manifests in different cultures, and it's one of those books where constantly people tell me, you were right. I just have to tell anybody around, listen to what it says here. And then there's an article by Leslie Hart, who's written numbers of books now recently on the recent brain research that's come out. But this is in the Phi Delta Kappa, about 1978, called The New Brain Concept of Learning, and I'll refer to this a little bit later when I'm going through the outline here. Okay, now here's what I'd like to cover. The basic rule of thumb in these kinds of settings, 2 of the key concepts, the 4 underlying assumptions, the whys, this is the philosophical basis, this is the child rearing principles that you do these kinds of settings, a little bit about play, some studies that have been done, and if we've got time, I'll sing Flowers Are Red, a song by Harry Chapin, and we'll finish with The Lord Love You. Okay, that's the outline. Let me just jump right into it now. The basic rule of thumb at free schools. Free schools are growth settings where the basic rule of thumb is that you can do as you please as long as you're not hurting or bothering anyone else. Now, people, please hear the second part of the question. When I was over at Summerhill, Neil cornered me and he says, please tell the Americans, when you talk to the Americans about Summerhill, that there's the second part to that basic rule of thumb. Everybody wants to think about free schools as places where you can do as you please, period. And that's not what the free schools means. That's why he titled the book oriented toward American audiences, Freedom, Not License. So now, often when I'm making the presentations, I change the sentence around and I say, as long as you're not hurting or bothering anyone else, you can do as you please. So that they hear that part. It's a freedom very much restricted by the rights of other people. Okay? Now, what that means in practical terms is No grades. All classes are non-compulsory. You go only as if you want to go. You stay only as long as you want to stay. No grades. That means grades A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever that is. And no grade level. First grade, second grade, third grade, that kind of stuff. We just talk about there's learning. All right? On the issue of grades, when I was in graduate school, the stacks of educational literature, when I found them, were about that high on the detrimental effects that grades have on long-term learning. They're a great motivator for short-term learning. They make people stay up all night and take illegal substances and cram their minds full of information so that they can regurgitate it on the test. But in terms of long-range learning, there's some evidence that they're a detriment because they make you hate the material because you have to go through those kinds of experiences, in order to pass the test. Get off my back, that kind of stuff. See? And what we're trying to get at is lifetime learning. That's what you keep. Okay. And the easy example that I use often when I'm talking to the university classes is I'll just ask for people to put their hands up. Those people that I was there this morning talking to university class. And I asked them, all right, everybody in this class fully confident now of walking into last semester's final. They're only 3 weeks into their school, into this semester. Fully confident walking into last semester's final. Put your hands up. Not one, nobody. And where's all that energy and all that cramming? So no grades, no grade level. Okay? Now, there are two key concepts that these kinds of settings embody. This stuff I've just pulled out a lot. I don't know that you can find all of this anywhere written. I just kind of pulled it out from numbers of sources. The two key concepts are, on the individual level, we're talking about self-regulation, self-discipline. Now, the point there is that you can't teach self-discipline. It's a contradiction in terms to say that you can teach self-discipline, because if I'm doing the disciplining, then they're not doing it. They're not doing it to themselves. Okay? So on the individual level, we're talking about self-discipline. Okay? Equally important, then, is the second key concept, and this is the one that's most often overlooked when people think about preschools, and that's the community component of self-discipline called self-government. That's the second key concept. And that says that all the rules of the school, except those that have to do with health and safety, that come down from the state that you have to comply with in order to stay open in the school, those rules are made on a one-person, one-vote basis by everyone who participates in the setting, adults as well as children, one person, one vote. And that's an attempt at an equal rights learning environment. Okay? It's an attempt at it. Now, kids yield to adults on the basis of experience and wisdom and those kinds of things. So it's true that the adults have more say. But we get voted down. I mean, all of us as adults in those settings have been voted down on something that we thought was appropriate for the school. Okay, now, on the point of self-government, those of us that are enthusiastic about these kinds of settings get all riled up, especially in this country, which purports to democracy and preaches democracy over the face of the globe. Democracy, democracy, democracy. Then what we do is take our children and put them into settings where all the major decisions about their lives come down from the top. See? And then we expect people, after 12 years of that kind of conditioning, and then another 4 years, if it's, they go on to college, to jump over the line and be active, participating members in a democracy. See, it's one of those questions where you don't need to have too much of a psychology background. It's just common sense. You can't put people in those kinds of authoritarian settings and then expect them that kind of message isn't going to follow them as they get out of those kinds of settings. Neil, when I was over there, was laughing. He says to me, I thought we were the worst. We here in Great Britain, he says, you people are starting to rival us, he says, I think, you in the United States. We have these elections. The day after the elections, the statistics come out and they say less than 50% of the people voted. And then the papers are full of, aren't we all apathetic? Aren't we all apathetic? Just look at our apathetic culture. And he goes, we're training people to do that in what we're calling our educational institutions. So we take the concept of democracy very, very seriously. Starting at age 5, one person, one vote. Now, people, we know we're going to make mistakes, both in self-regulation. We know we're going to make mistakes as young people, and the reason is because we're still making them as adults. See? Anybody that's got self-discipline down 100%, I'd like to know about it, because I need them out here as a role model. See? And we make crazy, crazy rules. But the point there is that then we have to live with those rules. You have to deal with that reality. See? Now, I'm often asked, people say, well, wait, but if the child goes to that school, how are they going to react to the real world when they get out and you can't make all the rules? And that was a question that puzzled people to the point that there was a guy named Bernstein who went over to Summerhill to look at that question. And he found former Summerhill students, and he says he tracked them down and said, okay, how did you react when you got out in the real world? You've been to a setting where you had the power to make the rules for yourself. How did you get out in the real world and deal with the rules where you couldn't make them? And they were saying, are you crazy? See, we're not having trouble with rules. And the reason is we've tried to make the perfect rule for 12 years. When you try to make them for yourself, you understand that there's no rule that's absolutely fair to everybody in all circumstances. See, we don't have any problem. We know what rules are all about, and because we've been on the other side, we've tried to be the rule makers and tried to make the perfect rule. Okay? Now, this is the crux, the underlying assumptions. Why do you do a growth setting like this? This is, I was talking to Don Rapp's classes this morning, and he has me come in because he says it's the one setting that he's ever seen that is operating on what he calls very sound child rearing principles. I'm going to talk about that now, even from the brain perspective, a little bit later, and I'll refer these back to this, the recent research that's gone on with the brain.
How old is he?
This has all happened because of just common sense in the past. Now a lot of the research is starting to support it. Okay? First underlying assumption is in educationese first. The fancy language is that the affective development in people's lives is more important, at least as important, and most of us in the free school movement say it's more important than the cognitive development in a child's growth. That's the fancy academic way of putting it. The real language way of putting it is that the emotions are more important than the head stuff. Neil's phrase for it is hearts, not heads in schools. We ought to be dealing with hearts and not heads in schools. All right? Here's the principle. If you have family problems, if you have boyfriend or girlfriend problems, if the emotions are churned up in your body, then there is no way that you're going to sit down and listen to a lecture on the history of the Babylonian conquest and have that information get in. I have a friend over there at the university called it psychological noise. If the emotions are churned up, the psychological noise, it'll never get in there. The head will never be able to do what it can do very well. So predominate. See, it should in growth settings is the heart. Get the emotions settled. Get them calm. Provide the setting that allows for the expression of the emotions. See, and then the educational process can go on. That's the second underlying principle, and that is that the mind is naturally inquisitive. The mind is naturally inquisitive. My behaviorist friends don't like that statement. They say, "What do you mean naturally?" I don't know what natural nature is. Here's the point. It is the mind's function in the body to learn. That's what it does. That's why it's there. You don't need to teach the mind to learn. It already does that. It comes doing that. Okay? Now, the way that I like to make that point is, I ask people to put up their hands, and I say, hands up everybody who taught your fingernails to grow. Or hands up everyone who taught the liver to function. We don't do that. They know how to grow. They know how to function. What you can do, where's that chart? Let me show you what you can do. And there's no doubt about it anymore. I was a graduate student in psychology for a while in a behaviorist program, and there's no doubt. What you can do is you can stop the natural inclinations of what's going on in the body. You may know, I don't know if you know, growth doesn't happen like this. Growth doesn't go bigger, 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 bigger. That's not the way growth happens, really. Growth happens like this. You go out, and then you get back off, and you go out, and then you get bigger, and then you back off. And they look at plants, and plants get bigger, and then at night they get smaller, and then they get bigger, and so do humans, and so do paramecium, and all that other kind of stuff. See, that's the way growth happens. You could, if you wanted, there's no doubt about it. It used to be they thought, but now they know. You could, if you wanted, stop the natural inclination of the body to do what it does. You could stop your fingernails from growing. There is no doubt about that. What you would do is you would put small plates on the end of your fingernails, cut them short, and then every time that your fingernails pushed out against that plate, you'd give yourself just a mild shock. It wouldn't have to be a shock that was, very severe. Just a mild shock. Just enough to jolt you. Okay? And then the fingernails would back off. And you wouldn't have to do that very long before the body would get the message, and the message of the body would be, don't send out the fingernails. And you can stop them. You can do that. They can do that. That's exactly what we say that's the indictment that we have against what most educational systems are doing to people's minds. That we're calling them educational settings, and yet what they're doing is they're turning off the mind's natural inquisitiveness. See? And if you don't believe it, what you do is you take young kids, and you see them at 5 years old and 4 years old, where they've been with their parents and so on, and the eyes are bright, and you can just see the mind going. And they're funny, and they're witty, and laughing, all that kind of stuff. And we put them into settings, and we say, sit down, and shut up, and you need a little bit of discipline, and move when we say move, and so on like this. And what happens is the stares. By 3rd and 4th grade, the stares start happening. And I'll get people, I talk to university classes, and I'll get these people that have heard me in the university classes, and then come back 5 and 6 years later, and they say, I remember a lot what you said, but I remember about the stares that start to happen, and they'll say, I'm frantic about it, what can I do? They're teaching now in the public school system. And there it is, see, that. Interesting. This is interesting because it runs counter to most people's immediate impulses. But the first and foremost responsibility of any growth setting with children is a negative one. Not a positive one, a negative one, and that is, don't destroy what's already there. See, the commitment has to be, don't destroy, don't turn off that natural inquisitiveness of the mind to learn. It's the learning mechanism in the body. The mind does incredible learning tasks you just watch young children. They learn language with no instruction. And if we tried to teach them language in some kind of very, very tightly controlled curriculum way, we'd have disasters in terms of talking. Mommy. No, watch my mouth. It's mama. Or they say mama, we say no, mommy. Pull your lips back. That absurdity then starts to catch people. Yeah. All right? And you'll see when we start talking about these brain principles now that are coming to light, why that is. All right, that's the second underlying assumption. The mind is naturally inquisitive. Third principle is all knowledge is interrelated. People say, no, Pat, if I send my child to their school, you're saying they can do anything that they want. And I'm saying, yes, as long as they're not hurting or bothering anyone else. And they say to me, but you don't understand. My child, if you let them do whatever they want, what they'll do is cowboys and Indians all day long. Inside, I'm going, yes! I don't say that to parents because I know what the concern is. But I'm going, yes, indeed. Because I know this principle, that all knowledge is interrelated. Here's the point. You can't study any piece of subject matter in very much depth, with very much enthusiasm, for very long, without having to get yourself into all kinds of numbers of other related disciplines. It's impossible. That's even recognized by some universities. On the university level, they'll have a title called not just professor, but one above that called a university professor. That Buckminster Fuller was one at Southern Illinois. Paul Tillich was one at Harvard. Okay? That technically says that the people have gone so far into their own discipline that they've had to broaden themselves so broadly that they have the technical, quote, ability to walk into any class on the university setting and make some contribution in that field. That's that principle personified. See, it's not why it doesn't get out. Let me give you this is an extreme example of this principle, but let me tell you about it. It usually doesn't happen this thoroughly. But Orson Bean is a comedian. And Orson Bean got very interested in Summerhill and then went over and visited a couple of times. And then it percolated in his mind for a while, and he got a school going in upstate, in New York City. And one night he was on the Johnny Carson show, and he brought with him one of the students from the Johnny Carson show. And this kid is 11 years old. Okay? And what this kid's passion was comic books. See? Comes to school, comic books. Now, what the school did not say was, okay, put away your comic books, you've got to learn some arithmetic. Put away your comic books, you better pick up some spelling. Put away your comic books, you better learn geography. Put away your comic books. What they said was, okay, comic books, have at them. See? And then pretty soon, very quickly, and you know, if you work with they're great sorters, they only like certain ones, right? Pretty soon he's only looking at war comic books. You know, superheroes out, Archie out, Walt Disney out, war. Right? And so then, what the parents didn't do and what the school didn't do was, what we're going to have here is we're going to have, if we let this kid pursue that interest, what we're going to have is a very narrowly focused, war-mongering comic book freak. See? I mean, they didn't do it because they know the principle. They say, okay, war. So then pretty soon he's drawing the stick figures like this. And he's asking people, how do you spell kill that commie in the tree? And they say kill is K-I-L-L. And so what's a K? A K is like this. And he says, I know what an I is, and so on like this. Right? The parents say, we never taught him to read. Taught him to read. We read to him. We put him in our laps. We read to him when he wanted to be read to. The school says never went to any reading classes. Okay? Pretty soon the kid's reading. And he's still drawing his comic books. Now the stick figures are getting a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more sophisticated. To the point then he started reading about battles. To the point then that he's on the Johnny Carson show, and Johnny Carson asks him this question, and he starts explaining. He's got these fully illustrated comic books now at 11 years old that are 30 and 40 pages long, full color, they close up on them. And Johnny Carson asks him this question, and he doesn't realize, he hasn't been prepped well enough to realize that you're supposed to give short answers because there are commercials coming. And he starts explaining a parallel between some incident in the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, and some battle that took place in the Second World War. And I'm sitting there watching this thing. Now, I don't know, my World War II history is terrible. I don't know about that. I don't know if he was right about what he said about it. But one of the things that I do part-time is teach the humanities. And I've read the Iliad over, and the Iliad's a great book if you don't have to read it for humanities class and get graded on it. But I've read that thing numbers of times, right? I get out of my seat and grab my Lattimore's translation of the Iliad and go shh. And I'll be danged if he isn't dead center right on about what he's talking about coming out of the Iliad. See? And there's the principle. If you're going to, you can't study war, comic books very long without having to get yourself into history and geography, see, and technologies, those kinds of things, and ethnic studies, see, all the way into Homer's Iliad. And there's no piece of subject matter that isn't that way. Okay, so that's all knowledge and related. Let them go. Last principle. And that's the one that everybody talks about and nobody wants to do anything about, actually do anything about, and that is, we're all unique. And it is fundamental to recognize the uniqueness of us all in any kind of a growth setting. Now, it's no news to a lot of people that they can make positive identifications of you and I by fingerprints, but they can do it by any organ in the body. Our livers are absolutely unique in the universe. Okay? And that says to us that standardized curriculum has got to go out the window. It really doesn't matter that everybody learns what the capital of Venezuela is at the same time. And some kids want to learn very early, and some kids want to learn very late. And there's a lot of evidence now to come out that late readers are often the lifetime long readers. If they don't have all that negativity, it's coming down upon them. See? So that whole standardized curriculum kind of thing just goes out the window. Now, let me show you that stuff people have been doing in free schools for a heck of a long time, just out of kind of intuition and common sense and work and experience with kids. Now comes, in the last 20 years or so, all this new brain research. Okay? And now are starting, the research has been on the brain, but now people are taking that brain research and saying, okay, how does this apply then to educational settings? And you have people like Leslie Hart then trying to synthesize down what they know based on the recent brain research about what is appropriate, how the brain does what it does best. I got it. And we've got it in here. You can read the whole article if you want to. He talks about 5 conditions. 5 conditions that are necessary for the brain to do what it does best. This is especially, and his argument is these ought to be the conditions that are the underlying focus for every single school. We want to really know what we know about the brain. We want to work with what we know about the brain and make schools brain compatible. Here are the 5 conditions. And watch this. The first is different language. This was pointed out to me. I didn't even know about this. And Don Rapp in Home and Family Life and Child Development says, you know what? You're talking, I said, I was reading this stuff, and he says, you're so dang right. I mean, it was almost like I was reading this stuff and saying, all he's done is taken Pat's stuff and put it into a different language. First is, he says, the brain is aggressive. See, we say the mind is naturally inquisitive. But the brain chooses its learning patterns. That's what they know about it. It's aggressive. It knows how to learn. The second is that it's individual. Every brain learns differently. It admits only what it decides to admit, and it processes what it does admit in its own individual way. We say it's fundamental to respect the individual. We're all unique, and it's fundamental to respect that uniqueness in growth setting. The third thing that he says is that the neocortex, which is 5/6 of the whole of the brain, does not function well under threat or pressure. And that's all that stuff about no grades. That what happens is that there are basically three brains in the human brain. The neocortex is that which is most human. It makes us the most human. And then there's a mammalian brain, the mammal brain. It's kind of under that. And then there's that what they call the reptilian brain, the fight or flight. And under threat, what the brain does is downshift to, you make the person an alligator, fight or flight. See? Eat, get out, whatever it is like this. And all of that neocortex stuff, which really makes us the human being, and all of its potential just gets blanked right there. And it's fight or flight. Under threat. Under the issue of threat. Okay. The fourth principle. Young students in particular, we don't, it's interesting on this one because what this principle is talking about young students in particular must talk to learn well and properly. Most of the neocortex has to do with language. And so they say, his indictment is, in most school settings, you want the teacher talking and the kid listening. And he says, you've got to absolutely reverse that. If they're not talking, he says, we're not allowing that which the brain can do so well. The brain's mechanism, the brain's natural inclination to learn. We're stifling that. Okay? And the last one is that it is not logical. The brain does not work in the logical, sequential patterns. Step-by-step, ordered, sequential patterns. It doesn't operate that way. It can operate that way, but the real genius of the human brain is that it's instead of working by precision, it works by probability. See, and by approximation. And then he says it's not digital, it's analog. I don't understand computer terms, but that's cool, right? And we say that all knowledge is interrelated. Okay, that's that. And we've got that. You can read this. We've got it on file if you want to really take a look at it. Okay, now let me talk about play. People say, if you allow kids to do what they want to do, I said, yes, but if they can't hurt or bother anybody else, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be playing all day. And I said, because there is an increasing body of evidence, and it's increasing and increasing and increasing, to suggest that play is child's work. It's the most serious thing they can do. More serious than learning their numbers, more serious than learning their letters. See? And when you start to look at play in that context, that's what all this stuff is about, is numbers. Today is for children, numbers can wait. When you start to look at play in that context, then you start to see all of those axioms about child development go flying out the window. An average 5-year-old's attention span is 20 minutes. Bunk. An average 5-year-old's attention span is 20 minutes doing something they don't want to be doing, that they're forced to do. Right? Watch the 5-year-olds go on something that they want to do. Hours, days. See? And where do you learn self-discipline? What is discipline? Discipline is picking the task that you choose to reach and staying at that task in spite of the obstacles that come in your way. Right? If there are no obstacles, no discipline. Right? And you watch kids playing and against the overwhelming odds about building the thing that keeps falling down, and they stay at it and stay at it and stay at it and hammer, because they're picking their goals and then staying with them until, in spite of the obstacles. And you start to see, and then what happens when people get tilted as adults? And what do we do with them? We take them back and we put them in psychodrama, that's play. We take them in role playing, that's play. Now Neil is bombastic on this point. He says childhood is playhood, and any setting that deprives children of the right to play is creating a crime against the children. It's hard to say that, right? I mean, people thought, come on, a little hyperbole there, and now maybe not as much as we thought. Yeah, hyperbole, but not as much as we thought. Okay, I'll tell you about some stuff. There is an increasing body of evidence coming hard and fast now to suggest that you and I, that's the average student going at an average rate, can learn everything that we learned from kindergarten to the 12th grade in 2 years. You have to be a fully functioning neurological entity in order to do that. You have to do it after 11 or 12 years old, when you've got those capabilities and all the neurons and the synapses are going. Now that's interesting, because it was Plato who said we shouldn't start any curriculum instruction for kids until people were 10 years old. Plato. And then Montaigne in the Middle Ages, Renaissance really, says, well, schooling in terms of step-by-step curriculum approach to the education ought to start at about 11. And Piaget, most recently, all that stuff about Piaget, who's a developmental psychologist, says, it's somewhere around 11, or that the person becomes the fully functioning neurological entity, and all of those connections are made, and then the curriculum approach makes intuitive sense to them, and they don't understand it until then. See? And now the research about, if you'll wait until after a person is a fully functioning neurological, it takes 2 years on the average to teach what you can teach in kindergarten to the 12th grade. And when I'm reading that, I'm going, well, what if they're wrong? What if they're wrong by a factor of 2? Then what they got me is they got me for 8 years. That's 8 years of time, and most of that's what is happening. It's time that I could have been doing other things. See? The information is, if you wait till after a person's 11 years old, not only do they learn it, but they learn it better with longer retention and more comprehensibility. That's that worry about, well, if they don't start reading early enough. If they don't start picking up this information, will they miss it? Okay. How will they do in college? What about college? There was a study done in the other progressive era of education called the 8-year study, or the Aiken study, A-I-K-E-N, I think it's called, where they took kids from what they call progressive schools, and back then they got colleges to admit them. It was a tightly done study, 1,500 kids who had gone to progressive kinds of settings and got colleges to admit them. And then they wanted to look at 1,500 kids who had gone through regular kinds of educational settings and see how well they did in college. Compare them. And they matched them according to the educational levels of the parents and the geographical areas of the country and whether they lived in urban settings or rural settings. And they got them into college. And they were measuring grades, participation in extracurricular activities, career orientation, and then something else, some other factor. And right across the board, the kids that had been to the more innovative settings, and get this, they defined innovative by the degree to which the students were taking responsibility for their own education. Right across the board, those kids were doing better than their counterparts that had gone through the normal public school setting. Okay? That didn't surprise them, because in most innovative schools, the teacher-student ratio is, there are many less students to teachers. And they thought, okay. But what they thought the curve would look like was this. Here's normal schooling, here's the innovation, and the degree to which that is, the definition of the innovation is the degree to which the people are taking responsibility for their own education. They thought it would look like this. That there would be the maximum, the students would do best who had some combination of structure and freedom. Structure. I don't like the word because there's no such thing as an unstructured situation, but, right? And what they found was this. That the farther away from the normal it got, the better the kids did in college. And then when it hit them that, look, what's happening is that these kids that were coming from these kinds of settings, given what they were measuring, grades, had a lot more experience with the self-regulation when they hit the college setting, and those first 2 years of grades, those first 2 years of their college setting, they didn't have to do all the readjustments like most people do. Some graduate schools will kick out your first 2 years of grades because they know you're there, you're on your own, you've got all this readjustment happening, and so that really doesn't tell us anything. So these kids' first 2 years of grades were higher, then it leveled out, but their overall GPAs were higher. See, the participation in extracurricular activities happened easier because they were, they settled in quicker. Nothing's kind of staggering. Once they sat down and analyzed, it surprised them. The most recent study that's been done on free schools was a short-term study done out of California, and they wanted to study, are these kids doing better? Are they doing worse? Are they doing, just about the same? What's going on? 2-year study out of California. The results were these kids don't do any better on achievement test scores, but they don't do any worse either. The preschools jumped on it and says, yeah, okay, so we're doing on the average okay, and allowing for all of this other stuff. Okay. Now, let me play you a question. Song?
Because the table ran out.
Harry Chapin died. Okay, want to see this?
Yeah.
Harry Chapin died a couple of years ago in a car wreck. He was doing Live Aid before people were doing Live Aid. Every second concert he gave, he was donating all the proceeds to World Hunger. He funded Food First, so if you're interested in hunger. And one of the songs, wrote a lot of things, but one of the songs that he wrote was "Flowers Are Red." No, I don't think first day of school, got some crayons and he started to draw. He put colors all over the paper, 4 colors was what he saw. Teacher said, "What you doing, young man?" "I'm making flowers," he said. She said, "It's not the time for art, young man. Besides that, flowers are green and red. There's a time for everything, young man, and the way things should be done. You got to show concern for everyone else, for you're not the only one." She said, "Flowers are red, young man. Green leaves are green. And there's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen." But the little boy said, "There are so many colors in the rainbow, so many colors in the morning sun, so many colors in the flowers, and I see everyone." The teacher put him in the corner. She said, "It's for your own good, and you won't come out till you get it right and start responding like you should." Well, finally he got lonely, frightened, thoughts filled his head, and he went up to the teacher, and this is what he said. He said, "Flowers are red, green leaves are green, and there's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen." Time went by like it always does, and they moved to another town. And the little boy went to another school, and this is what he found. The teacher there was smiling. She said painting should be fun, but there's so many colors in the flower, so let's use every one. But that little boy painted flowers in neat rows of green and red. When the teacher asked him why, this is what he said. He said, "Flowers are red, green leaves are green, and there's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen." Harry Chapin. That's what the stakes are. The quote from Lord Buckley is talking about flowers. Love this quote. Lord Buckley was a jazz storyteller who traveled around with Dizzy Gillespie and those kinds of circles and told hip language stories. And one of his quotes I love is, he says, "People, yes, people are the true flowers of life, and it has been a most precious pleasure temporarily to have strolled in your garden."
Thank you.